It's Friday, May 6th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker, coming to you from the offices of the New York Amsterdam News in Harlem. On this week's podcast, my special guest is Michael Hardy, who is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for the National Action Network. He's with me to discuss the latest in the departmental hearing for NYPD Officer Daniel Pantaleo, who killed Eric Garner in 2014. But first, I've got your AM News headlines. This week's front page story is Pantaleo Has to Go, highlighting the departmental hearing for NYPD Officer Daniel Pantaleo, who killed Eric Garner in 2014. Pantaleo was captured on cell phone video in Staten Island using a banned chokehold that killed Garner. If found guilty, Pantaleo could be fired from the NYPD. Just over a week after a fire ripped through a Harlem apartment, killing 6 people, including 4 children, hundreds of people have donated tens of thousands of dollars to cover the cost of the victims' funerals. Andrea Polidar, along with her 4 young children and 32-year-old stepson, perished in the fire on May 8th in the Frederick E. Samuel apartments. The 5th annual Harlem Eat Up Food Festival kicked off this week. Several events are being held for diners to sample from some of Uptown's best restaurants. The main event for the festival is set to take place this weekend in Morningside Park. And I just want to tell you, I've been to that event several times since we've actually been involved with it here at the Amsterdam News for several years. And it's a really nice event. If you want to read more about it in the paper, Keisha Harris in the Am News Food section has all the information that you need. And as always, you can also read all the stories that I just mentioned and more in the newspaper, which is on newsstands now and online at amsterdamnews.com. My guest this week is Michael Hardy, who serves as Executive Vice President and General Counsel for the Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network. He's with me on the phone to discuss the departmental hearing for NYPD Officer Daniel Pantaleo. First, Michael, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Can you give us an update on what's going on with this case?
Well, right now, finally, Mr. Pantaleo is facing his departmental trial. This is the trial that is brought through a complaint by the CCRB against him. It's being conducted at the hearing offices at One Police Plaza. And the best outcome of this is that finally Mr. Pantaleo will be, found to have violated police policy and will be removed from the New York City Police Department.
Okay. And I know for a lot of us who have been watching this case since it happened in 2014, have been searching for justice. The family's been searching for justice. Take us a little bit through that journey. You've had a front row seat to all of this since over the last few years. What's your take on the entire situation?
Well, the short form answer on that is it's really truly unfortunate that back in in July of 2014 when this incident happened, that he was not, and I'm talking about Mr. Pantaleo, and for that matter, some of the other officers who participated in the death of Eric Garner, was not arrested and prosecuted and put and found through a grand jury to really be tried for the death of Eric Garner. Mm-hmm. And that is truly one of the sad stories in this, is that real justice in terms of having to really face jeopardy in terms of his in terms of his liberty. He should not be walking the streets because he killed Eric Garner, and there should have been a proper trial, and there really should have been a federal prosecution here. And so those are some of the sad facts here and the missed opportunities, for there to be real justice here. And it just demonstrates that, again, while we take minor steps forward in this fight for justice and true accountability and equal treatment from many communities and certainly underserved communities and police departments across the nation, we still have a long way to go.
And I know that Gwen Carr Eric Garner's mother has been on the front line. She was on the front page of our paper this week with our headline, Pantaleo has to go. You've spoken to her over the years. I'm sure you've spoken to her recently. How is she holding up with all of this?
Well, Gwen, one of the unsaid things, and as General Counsel of the National Action Network, I've seen it in many cases, because you've seen it in New York cases, for instance. You saw it in the Sean Bell situation. You saw it in other situations where Mrs. Garner has been a rock in terms of standing up and sustaining the indignation over the way in which her son was killed, and being on the front lines of the efforts to find accountability from the New York City Police Department and the individual officers who were involved. She has been enormously strong. I mean, 2014 July will be 5 years almost since this incident had happened, and Mrs. Garner has developed into a real activist. It's just amazing to see what some of the mothers have done in terms of the Mothers of the Movement groups that they have founded to give each other strength. Leslie McFadden, who was the mother of the young man killed down in Florida, is now a congressperson.
Right.
Michael Brown's mom is now a council person. Gwen Carr, who presented at the Democratic National Convention and other places, has really become an activist in her own right. And so have others in her family. Many really also got to know Eric's sister, Erica Garner, who sadly passed away through some of the stress that this struggle brought into her life as a result of Eric's death. So Gwen Carr has been a class act, and the whole Garner family has been a class act, and each of them, in the ways that they have really stood up and been a voice, for justice and not ever giving up that fight, and again sustaining the will to proceed all the way, and never giving up hope.
Yeah. Again, we've been watching her on the front lines since day one, from when it happened to the big rally that happened shortly after in Staten Island. She's been the subject of several television interviews and documentaries, and she just never quits and doesn't stop, which I think is absolutely amazing. Tell us a little bit about the National Action Network's involvement with this. You all have been there with the family, right beside Gwen Carr and the rest of the family. What are the next steps here? Because this trial, I think they said it was going to go on for a week. It's Thursday now. The outcome might not be what we want to hear. Hopefully it is. Tell us about Nan's involvement with this.
Well, we've been involved from day one. From Eric was killed on that July 17, which if I'm not mistaken, was a Wednesday probably, because on Saturday of that week, we already were out in Staten Island with the family and actually held a first march that first Saturday after his death, and have been there ever since. Reverend Sharpton has technically been the national spokesperson for the Garner family throughout this process. And we've committed and supported the Garner family in every way that we can as an organization, have supported them through thick and thin, through some of the challenges in their own lives, and finding ways to be supportive of them so that they can endure and really stand up to. People don't realize, and people never ask for a crisis to strike them. And so, like Pantaleo has had the asset of the police unions to stand behind them to help give support and comfort to his family. Well, We have been there as an organization to do that, and as many people have said, that Reverend Sharpton does and that Nan does, to help give real voice to someone who was voiceless at the moment of that crisis, which is what the Garner family was. Yeah. We were able to, bring their issue public, and help people really truly understand what happened here, but more importantly, give them the bedrock and the support that they needed to do what they needed to do to sustain themselves through this struggle.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the other question is that we keep seeing this happen repeatedly with unarmed black men being shot, and there's no consequence for it. And I want to know from you, what is the solution here to stop this from happening? Because it seems like we're revisiting this every year, and maybe every couple months we're seeing this, especially with the new administration in the White House. A lot of times people are saying that's probably, but this was happening even before then. So I don't know if that has something to do with it or not. But why does this keep happening? And what can the community do? What can people do to kind of put pressure on our elected officials, on our government, on our on people to keep this, to stop this from happening?
Yeah, well, I think the relationship, the underpinning of the entire relationship really probably goes back, to the founding of this nation and our history as second-class citizens in this nation. We have had to fight first for the right to be considered human beings, right. Not subjected to slavery. And then after slavery ended, it was really substituted with legal discrimination against black people in this country. And so we still are feeling the effects of that, where law enforcement in particular, and the relationship between our community and law enforcement has never been done on an equal basis. People take it as an example. One of the most recent situations in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where you had Orlando Castillo in a similar kind of situation as Eric Garner, who was shot and killed in cold blood by a police officer without any cause, and nothing really happens there. There's really no justice. But then you have a situation where a white woman is killed by a black police officer, and that police officer is held to account for that crime. And you had it right here in New York City, where an Asian officer is held to account, but white officers walk away from these situations all the time. So unfortunately, it is built into the structural disadvantages that we experience as a people and as a community in this nation. And we have fought that, and we have made tremendous strides, because the fact that a police officer, no matter where in the nation now, commits an act like was committed against Eric Garner, it's no longer the case that there's a blind eye. There will be a process. And sometimes the process ends in some success, and we saw the greatest success in New York around these issues with regard to Abner Louimer, right, when Justin Volpe was convicted, and to this day is still in federal prison for having sodomized and violated the constitutional rights of Justin Volpe. And we've had other victories, ending stop and frisk in this city was a major victory.
Absolutely.
But it's a fight, and like any fight, it's not what happens in the short term, it's what happens in the long term. And there'll be victories along the way, but the real equality in this is a long way off. And it begins on so many levels, because at the end of the day, like many things, law enforcement is a governmental institution. And until you have governments that truly reflect the needs of the people collectively, regardless of status, regardless of background, regardless of color, you're still going to have these unequal applications of justice to certain communities, and that's what we experience. But thank God, there have been movements, and in the latter half of the 20th century, National Action Network and the movement for no justice, no peace has become a rallying cry internationally, for freedom, justice, and the will to speak truth to power and to stand up and fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that whenever this happens, we see people in the community come together and help others and encourage each other, because this can be draining emotionally when we keep seeing this over and over again. We're kind of at the head of the 2020 presidential election. As you know, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced today, but I'm not going to ask you about that. What I do want to ask you about is that this issue of
hey, they say you can't win it unless you're in it. So,
yeah, that's true.
everyone has a desire, and you pursue what you think you can do. I mean, you can't stop someone from pursuing their dreams.
Definitely. But what I do want to ask you about is that with the 2020 election, on the horizon for next year, this issue has become a political issue. So much so, I do remember when Hillary Clinton was running for president, at the Democratic National Convention, she brought the Mothers of the Movement on the stage. I think it was on the second or third night of the convention. So this is, a political issue. How should presidential candidates address this issue? Should they, what's the best way to tackle this issue that is plaguing so many people in the black community?
Well, as you know, Josh, at our national convention this year, National Action Network's convention, we had many of the then announced presidential candidates come through National Action Network. And Reverend Sharpton really asked two questions to those candidates. One, will you support the efforts to achieve real reparations in this nation, for the governmental subjugation of black people to slavery and the effects of that? And two, will you work to introduce, reform, and enforce the federal laws with regard to police community relations in this country that can be developed and that are on the books already? There is a very strong pattern and practice federal law, but it's just never used to its fullest. And we saw some of that during the Obama administration when they did use the pattern and practice to go after urban police departments that were systematically violating the rights of people and was achieving some success. So it does matter. Voting does matter because when the next presidential election came along and Donald Trump won that presidency, that Justice Department stepped away from many of those consent decrees that were working to reform these police departments to make them more diverse and more responsive to the communities that they serve.
All right. And I just want to ask you one last question before we wrap up here. And the question is, what is the victory here? I mean, is there still one? Is there still hope that we can get a victory here? Because what ultimately could happen is that Daniel Pantaleo could be fired from the NYPD. However, there's absolutely nothing that can bring back Eric Garner. And not only that, there's nothing that can, this is, when things like this happen, it just kind of chips away at the trust of the black community when it comes to law enforcement. And I want to know from you, what is the victory here, if there is one?
Well, I think the victory is that the family has stood up and sustained itself, exactly what we've been talking about. The victory is that they didn't disappear off the, horizon with regard to this fight. The victory is that Pantaleo is on trial for his job and his livelihood. And no matter what happens, hopefully the decision ultimately will come down to the police commissioner of the city of New York. And if you take all of the factors and weigh it equally, Mr. Pantaleo should not ever be allowed to police anyone again in his life. And that will be something that he and his family will have to deal with if that becomes the situation. And but the victory here is in the continued struggle again. And you take small steps to achieve great things, and you have to be willing to go the distance. It's not an easy fight, but but you have to be determined, and I think this family has shown that kind of determination and the will to win, and that in itself, I think, has been a victory for the family and for our community at large by the examples that they have shown.
All right. And I lied to you. I actually have one more question to ask you, and it's actually two things. Number one, can you give us a few things that maybe the National Action Network is doing right now? And also, what's the best way for folks to get connected with you? Because I know here at the AM News, we actually get quite a few calls from people asking us about what's the best way to get with you guys if they do have a problem. Usually what we do is we give them your telephone number. But what is the best way to get connected with the National Action Network?
Well, the two ways to connect is one through our website, which is nationalactionnetwork.net. Our toll-free number is 877-626-4651. Boy, whenever I have to do that off the top of my head. But you can get the toll-free number. The number to National Action Network is also 212. 690-3070. And the other way is, we are on the ground floor of our community every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We are at the House of Justice, which is our national headquarters for the National Action Network, and we do our weekly Saturday action rally that Reverend Sharpton has been leading since the day National Action Network was founded back in 1991.
All right. Well, listen, Michael Hardy, thank you so much. You always are a big help to us here at the Amsterdam News, and we always see you in the community. Thank you so much again for being on the podcast.
Well, we appreciate you, and you check out our toll-free number. If I made a mistake on it, give it to them correctly.
I certainly will. We'll definitely post that on the website along with the podcast so we can get that that correct number there. But thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
All right. That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. This is Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.